And welcome to the Midday Show. I am Jeff Everett. He is Mark Messina. I went with Worldly Wednesday. I wasn't sure. W is a hard adjective to come up with. It's like wacky.
I thought it was Leftover Wednesday.
It's like wacky, wonderful. Yeah, but I was going for the alliteration. Leftover Wednesday would have been better. 3 topics, 3 questions surrounding them all. I'm going to let you decide which ones, because these are some deep divers. We could end up on some of these for quite some time.
For hours.
The first one that I have listed, should meteorologist Erick Adame have lost his job over leaked video to an employer? This is a really interesting story about what your employer should care about or should have the ability to fire you over. The other one, I told you I became obsessed with the 5 Days at Memorial story. I'd read the book. I recently just finished the show. Anna Powell is the doctor from Hurricane Katrina. Not a lot of debate here. A lot of people either think she's a hero or she's a murderer, depending on who you ask. And then last but not least, Adnan Syed. If you're a fan of the Serial podcast, he was released. Do you think he's innocent? I believe you told me you were in Baltimore around the time that some of this was happening.
I lived in Baltimore. It happened in 90, didn't it?
I don't know if it happened in 90. It happened in the 90s, I believe. Because it's been a couple of years since I listened to the podcast.
I was in Baltimore from 94-ish to my daughter was born there, 2000-ish.
Okay.
So I was there most of the 90s, the late 90s.
So you were probably there when it was like being discussed whether or not he was innocent or guilty or not.
Maybe.
So those are 3 topics for today. Worldly Wednesday. Mark, how are you feeling today?
Well, I was feeling good until it was announced to me by someone who I will remain nameless. But he told me something that he thought was cool, and I kind of mocked it. And then he told me that he was not sharing any more cool facts with me anymore.
That's what happens.
So I'm not going to – it hurt. It hurt really deeply because I don't know.
Because I usually tell you cool facts.
Because you tell me cool facts. And now I'm cut off. I'm off the cool facts list. So all the cool things I am no longer privy to.
Yes, I will not apologize for it either. I will let you go ahead. You're going to roll the dice here.
Okay, I'll roll the dice with this first. I have 2 things to say first.
Oh, go ahead. I forgot about these.
Aaron Judge is leading the Triple Crown.
Yes.
Since I think Frank Robinson in the 60s. There's been one Triple Crown winner in like the last 50 years. Now, I'm not talking in baseball.
Yeah.
And to win the Triple Crown, you have to have the highest batting average, the most home runs, the most RBIs in either the American League or the National League. Okay. He's run away with home runs and RBIs. Okay. He has his batting average is 316. Xander Bogaerts is 315. Okay. And the Arraez kid in Minnesota is 314. So it's neck and neck. But Miguel Cabrera won it maybe 10 years ago. It is the historic season that Judge is having is getting even more historic. So I wanted to mention that. Also wanted to mention.
That one was like a 4. Continue.
The Steelers play tomorrow night.
Okay.
We talked about this shit. This is our public service announcement. Because I think it's clear the Steelers are the most popular team in the area. Wouldn't you say? I mean, the Eagles are
close.
But they are on the Thursday night game, and Thursday night game is now on Amazon.
Yes.
So for older Steeler fans, grandparents, whatever, people that are used to watching this, that you don't wait till 7:30 tomorrow night and then start searching for the game and realize you can't find it. And I don't think they're on local radio anymore. They were on local radio for 100 years, and which is an exaggeration. They were on for a long time, right. And I'm not sure they're on there anymore either. So if you are a Steeler fan, just start making plans, because tomorrow night you're going to have trouble finding it if you don't have the technology. So find someone who does.
Okay, nice. That was really nice of you, because there will be Steelers fans who don't know what to do.
And at 8 o'clock, they're going to be like, "Where's the game?"
Yes.
And so so help. And it's those people probably aren't on here. So like your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older neighbors, just people who you know. Yeah. Like reach out to them and help them out a little bit. I'm sure the establishments are going to have it.
I would imagine. Yeah, they've already got it figured out.
They've got it figured out somehow. Yes. So anyway, be that as it may, and we're off.
Yep.
Action.
Are you going to roll the dice? Which one would you like? I'm going to let you decide.
These are all.
I won't have a lot to say about Adnan, but
I was going to say let's do him first, because there's just.
That's fine.
There's information about this everywhere. When I saw it on HBO, you said there was a podcast. There's obviously lots of questions
Sure.
about, and we know the legal system has been far from perfect.
Absolutely.
And there is convictions that have little to do with evidence and lots to do with other things. And since this one was since they're doing national stories and podcasts and shows about it, it was up in the air, and then he just got released. Do you know why?
So he was in prison for more than 20 years. Part of the reason that I believe it is the evidence, is it the word expoliatory? I forget what the word is, but essentially the evidence.
Exculpatory?
Yeah. Essentially at this point, the evidence could no longer withstand. Like they couldn't hold up the fact that the evidence given was worthy of the conviction. There's a lot of things. I listened to the podcast when it first came out. I re-listened to the podcast on a trip to North Carolina and back with my girlfriend, but this would have been probably 3 years ago. So it's not like I'm up to, like it goes in your head, it kind of goes out of your head. However, there's a number of things here that I remember. It is kind of like it's pre-internet. It's pre everyone having a cell phone, but they, like there were phone pings, and that was one of the main ways that they were able to like convict him. It is fascinating how far we've come with some of this stuff. Even yesterday, when we were talking about the Adam Levine and whether or not he cheated and him, I was thinking to myself after we talked, what a ballsy move it was of Adam Levine to basically say, I didn't physically cheat, unless he didn't. Because nowadays, like, you would be able to find out where he was, what he was doing. It's just too easy now. Everything's tracked, everything's traced.
Who could?
Just in general.
Can his wife find that?
She can probably find phone records. She can probably find out like where phone calls were made from and what happened, and they can find out where every single phone call.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying is like I can't go to whoever your cell phone provider is
it's his
and say,
wife.
Can she?
Did you think she's on the phone bill? The point I'm making is they couldn't even have this conversation, and
I agree with
back then. That's the main gist of what I'm saying.
Yes, I get that.
So there's
if there was a murder case and there's a body, yes. If there's I think my husband was fooling around. No, can you track? I'm not sure what. I'm not sure they're allowed to do that.
But that's what this is. This is a murder case.
No, I get it. I get that.
It's just the idea of just not knowing and how differently things were solved back then. But then when you add on top of it, there was this idea, and I think there still is in some, like, I don't want to say mainstream, but when you think of how police and investigators operate, there is this idea of like closing a case matters. And so what you almost go from being curious to getting nervous. And what I mean by that is you're curious of what happened and you're trying to figure it out, and there's all these things. But then there is a tipping point after a while of you start to get nervous that you're never going to figure it out. And so I think that is the main gist of the podcast that I took away from Adnan, is I feel like Adnan was a case of, we have to close this case. We have to find out what happens. It's a young girl. People are scared. People are worried. There needs to be a solution. And it's an example of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but it was so important to them that they just filled the hole, that it didn't matter that it didn't fit exactly.
Exactly. And you wonder how many prosecutors, DAs, people in the legal system around the country are like, we need someone.
Yes.
And it's just as, and you also wonder how many of them, even when it's kind of presented to them that they think they got it wrong.
Yes.
Are willing enough, if they're still active and if they're still in office and if they still have elections coming, how many of them are very willing to let the innocent guy rot in jail to protect their own career and their own image?
Totally. And then the other part, because you did not listen to the podcast. Right?
No, I did not.
So what's fascinating about the podcast is it's basically its own investigation, but it's years later. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to recollect what happened the days leading up to it, what happened on that day, what happened. It is amazing. I'm blown away how they ever solved anything before like 1990. Because when you hear people try to recollect their thoughts or talk about their day, or I do it with you all the time. I'll go to write a description of the show for Spotify, and I will look at you dead seriously. We had just finished the show 10 minutes ago, and I will say to you, what did we talk about first? Mm-hmm. Because I have already like moved and shifted, and I'm doing things. Listening to people try to remember the weeks and the day and the weeks after that all of that happened. And all I could think of, like, that's what most investigations were before phones, DNA,
oh my gosh,
the internet. So, like, I'm just, how, like, the fact that anything was solved correctly is almost, I don't want to say it's a miracle, but I mean, to take people's words and their story and their recollections is really difficult to do in a manner in which you can trust what people are saying.
Correct. And the way you first remember, when you go back to think, the first time you replay it in your mind, that's what gets cemented, yes, whether you're right or wrong. My son and I just got in an argument over a football game the other day about what just happened. And I actually had to pick up the remote and rewind it so we could see what really happened.
Yeah.
And
so one of the things when they first start the podcast, one of the first things that she has to do, I think it's the first or second episode, but they're trying to narrow down or pinpoint the last time people have seen this young lady and the day it happened and all this. There was a impending snowstorm near or around the day. And it's fascinating to hear people talk, because some people are like, I remember I wore my winter coat because of the storm. And then there's other people that were like, we had track practice at 3:00. And so you just, these conflictions,
right.
and here, and the other thing too is like, people are so dead set. Like to them,
absolutely.
To them, their verbal history is the history. And so it just reminds me how far we've come. And it's like you said, it's still not perfect. It's not like it's foolproof. But I'm blown away that anything was ever actually solved before being able to actually have phone records, have internet searches, have DNA, just DNA in
Isn't
general.
Isn't it fun when you're in life and someone is adamant about something and you get to prove them wrong?
Yeah.
And I remember one that just jumps out in my head. I think it was the first year they had replay at the Little League World Series.
Okay.
And there was a first base coach who was adamant, and he was mic'd, that the guy was safe at first. And when I tell you he was out by a step and a half, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
And he's like, he was safe. They missed it. He's yelling into the dugout, challenge that one, challenge that one. And when they showed it, he was out by so much. And then the guy just went all humble, and they're like, oh. And then that always cracks me up too. The people who are emphatic that they were right, they're not emphatically apologetic when they're proven wrong.
No.
Then they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you just, oh, okay, I was wrong. Well, wait a minute. There's a difference between like I was wrong and you were ready to like burn the city down, and now all of a sudden you're proving that what you were screaming from the hilltops, it wasn't true, and now you're just like, oh well.
Yeah.
That drives me insane.
No, I'm with you. So Adnan Syed is released. Like any other thoughts? Like I said, it's just neat.
No, it's certainly something to look. There's information out there if you're curious about like you said, police work, investigations, why this one.
If you've never listened to the podcast, it is addicting.
It's fascinating.
And it is someone said the Adnan Syed story on Serial took podcasting to the next level. I would argue it really made, I don't know if podcasting would have broken through the way it has without it. I mean, it made storytelling and it made podcasting linked together, and all of a sudden it was a real form of entertainment. Like the way I am on Sundays to watch Game of Thrones, when the Serial podcast was being released, that's what it was like. Like you would get the notification that like episode 7 of Serial was out, and it was like headphones in and you were listening to it because you needed to know like what was going to happen next. So yes, it really did change the game.
Isn't it now House of the Dragon? It's no longer Game of Thrones.
Say that again?
Isn't it now House of the Dragon? It's not.
It's House of the Dragon. It's Game of Thrones.
Is it?
Yeah, it's Game of Thrones.
How many times have you watched the brothel episode?
Spring, only once. I've only watched it once. Yeah.
Are you lying?
No, I'm dead serious.
Okay, you're sure.
I just read an article about this. Science shows there's no correlation between confidence and accuracy. If it's an emotional memory, your brain will remember the central event vividly at the expense of the peripheral details. I can believe that.
I absolutely do.
Well, there's also, I think too, because I do this sometimes, like when I'm coaching or different things, I will notice that I will be looking at one thing, but I have no idea, like, the fans behind me, the bench to the left of me.
Yeah.
Like, it's really only your viewpoint and what you see. You have no idea what you it's impossible for a person to have a 360 viewpoint of what's actually happening around them.
It's one of the great things about video of the game, because as they always say, the film won't lie.
Sure.
And when you have a kid that tells you, well, this is what happened, and this is what I didn't punch him, and then you like watch the film and you're like, oh, you didn't? Right. And then and a lot of that is the immediate denial, but you're right. As sometimes the more you deny it, the more you believe it, and you've convinced yourself into believing, no, it wasn't a foul. It wasn't a foul. And the guy's bleeding from the nose, and you're like, I think you probably fouled him.
No, it's a really good point, Spring. So yeah, look up Adnan, and if you haven't listened to the podcast, it is, I assure you that it is worth it. Erick Adame.
Let's go to Erick Adame.
Okay.
Because this is philosophical, and the other one is a lot of well, I guess they're both philosophical. But let's go to Adame anyway.
So Erick Adame, he was a meteorologist for NY1 in New York, which is one of the bigger, like, if you're not going to
New York one,
yeah. I mean, if you can't be I'm blanking on the bald-headed guy that did the
Willard Scott.
Was it Willard Scott?
You know who he was?
No.
The first Ronald McDonald.
Yeah. Okay, I know who you're talking about. Who?
Oh, Al Roker.
Thank you,
okay.
Al Roker. If you can't be,
you can
Roker,
say it's okay. You can say the bald black guy, the bald white guy. You can help me out with
he's bald. He's bald.
Well, they're both. So is Willard Scott. I'm thinking of famous weathermen. You can give me a little. You can give me an ethnicity. It's okay.
This is my favorite part. You're reprimanding me. Meanwhile, you said two great ones who I knew both of the references, and I commended you for both of them. And somehow I'm getting yelled at as if you're like, it's as if I like looked at you and I was like, no, you idiot, the other one.
It was like you're afraid to say the bald black guy. I got to tell you this story before we go on. I was listening to ESPN radio once, and it was the dude out of Miami, the Cuban guy out of Miami, Dan Levitard. And they had one of the players, they were interviewing an NFL player, and I don't remember who he played for. And they were talking about, he said the running back for that team. Mm-hmm. And so they started, and he couldn't think of his name, the player. He's just like, and so they start rattling off. They get through like 6 or 7 running backs that have played for this team. And I can't remember Rex. His name's Rex. He plays for the Texans now.
Okay.
And they said him, and he goes, "Yeah, that's him." And all the guys on the show at the same time go, "Why didn't you just say the white guy?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, that's what we called him in the game. He's the white running back. Yeah. He's the only one." But they're like, if you would have just said the white guy, we would have known it was Rex. And he's like, "Well, I didn't know if I could say that on the radio."
I mean, but okay, here's the difference though. How many weathermen can people name? Like, if we were talking running backs, we could sit here all afternoon and name running backs. Like, how many famous weathermen are there? And
David Letterman wasn't weatherman, but I get your point. There's 2.
And
there's
you nailed
Willard
it, right.
Scott
And you said both of them.
All right,
So
all right, I get it.
So
it looked like you were afraid to say the black guy.
Yes. The point that I was making is that if you can't be Roker, this is probably like the next tier down.
Yeah. So and he'd been doing it. This Erick kid has been doing. I say kid. He'd been there a long time, like over a decade.
Quite some time. So he has been fired from his position as the morning meteorologist on Spectrum News for NI1 for a leaked appearance on an adult campsite. Here is, I mean, I don't want to necessarily read through the entire thing that he wrote on Instagram, but essentially what Erick did is he tried to get ahead of the situation. So as the announcement was about to come out, Erick posted this own thing. Bear with me because I think for the conversation,
some of it's really important.
It is important. He says, "I've recently been terminated from my job as the meteorologist at Spectrum News NYC. I am taking this opportunity to share my truth rather than let other people control the narrative of my life. My psychologist calls my actions compulsive behavior. Others would call them reckless, stupid, or brazen. I'm not in a position to argue with any of these descriptions. Despite being a public figure and being on television in the biggest market in the country in front of millions of people 5 days a week for more than a decade and a half, I secretly appeared on an adult webcam website. On this site, I acted out my compulsive behaviors while at home by performing on camera for other men. It was 100% consensual on both of our parts. I wasn't paid for this, and it was absurd of me to think I could keep this private. Nonetheless, my employer found out, and I was suspended and then terminated. So the question that I think you and I want to get to eventually is, should he have been terminated? Which we will get to. A couple of other keynotes and things he says. First and foremost, I unequivocally apologize to my employers, my coworkers. He goes on to apologize to his family and for humiliating them. He says, I can't take it back. I can't change what I did, but I am getting the professional help I need so I can make appropriate decisions that don't affect those I care deeply about, as well as my career as I move forward in my life. As a public figure, I recognize that I have certain responsibilities that come along with the privileges I enjoyed. But let me be clear about something. I don't apologize for being openly gay or for being sex positive. These are gifts. I have no shame about them. He would go on to essentially, I'm going to skip this part only because he talks about essentially he knows that people are watching him. He knows that people are judging him. That one isn't so much important. What does become important is think about your management of the newsroom. What have you have overlooked, forgiven, or ignored? In the end, all talent is fallible, full of human foils, and your job is not made easier by your antics. One thing I can promise is that I've learned a lesson, and I will be an exemplary employee and the most informed and enthusiastic meteorologist you have ever seen. However you feel about me as a colleague, viewer, or friend, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say. It means a great deal for those of you who have watched me over the years. And then he goes on to talk about how much he loved his job and how much he loves his family. So the question,
first of all, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so just to kind of context it all, the reason that you and I find this fascinating, he's taking complete, I would argue he's almost going further than what he needs to go as far as an apology or taking, not credit, but taking on accountability, responsibility. So the question that you and I had is, you have this unique individual who's not denying anything, a video that was done in his own house on his own time. He wasn't paid for. It wasn't a public display. It's not like he live streamed this on TikTok. Right. It wasn't his own public account or anything like that. It was a feed, but it was a private feed that it was being done on.
Right.
It fell into his employer's hands. It was also sent to his mom, which is a whole other conversation as well. It was sent to his employers. His employers.
Oh, the joys of parenthood.
His employers then terminated him. And I said to you, I'm really excited for this. Should he have been terminated or not? And I have not decided yet.
Well, from the business side, I mean, the station is deciding, I guess, if they think it will hurt business. Are they going to lose advertisers? Are they going to lose, viewers? Is this, and again, as it was mentioned, it wasn't public. It wasn't made public. It wasn't shared public. They got a hold of it, but it's in the movies. Like it showed up on a flash drive in an envelope, or it got emailed to them, or something along those lines. So it's, if they kind of wanted to keep this, I'm sure mom wasn't blasting it. Like if they wanted to keep it hush hush, they certainly could have. It goes back to the question of what somebody does in the privacy of their own home, or what somebody does they expect to be in the privacy of their own home. That does it matter? Should the employer care? And is it fireable?
The biggest thing to me, and I think I said this to you yesterday, when you actually read through it, nothing he did was actually illegal.
No, nothing he did was close to illegal.
Nothing he did was illegal. So this isn't like an instance where like you're doing illegal substances or something in your privacy of your own home, but for whatever reason, someone finds in your coat pocket or someone finds in the office or things like that. This is truly something that, see, like I even think he might have gone too far saying like compulsive behaviors or
when you go back, his psychiatrist or psychologist, whoever, called it a compulsive behavior, which when I first heard it, I laughed and I was like, what the psychiatrist is really calling it is a paycheck, because I'm going to label you as compulsive. You keep coming back to me and spending money.
It's very, very possible. So even him admitting to it and even him trying to, in a way, justify some of the behavior as like taboo or wrong, I don't even necessarily know if I agree with that aspect.
Am I the only person that doesn't know the term sex positive?
Sex positive?
Yeah.
Clearly you do. You just said it.
No, he said it.
Oh, sex
I've
positive?
never heard it before.
Yeah, sex positive means like you feel, I believe sex positive is when you feel good about your own personal determination about your sexuality.
And you're just getting that from context clues. You don't.
No. This is stuff
you know that. Okay,
like
I'd never heard that term before.
Yeah, it's that. My understanding is essentially like not only are you comfortable with sex and talking about things like that, but you are also comfortable within your own sexuality and who you are as a person.
Okay.
So you are
Makes sense.
So you are sex positive, and you're also sex positive in the sense of what other people do and their personal preferences and stuff like that.
That makes sense.
So I don't know. So I've gone back and forth on this as an employer. If this falls onto your desk, I mean, are you doing this out of fear because if it does leak out? Are you doing this because within the contract there's probably there's a morals and ethics code? Possibly. Are you doing it because he's a TV personality and it could reflect onto the personality of your station or what people view? I mean, all of those things are unbelievably fair questions, and I think it's part of the reason why I haven't decided yet if he actually should have been fired or not.
Well, I think one of the other issues, every time any employee gets fired, you've got to step to the background of, at work, was he loved? Was he a pain in the ass? And when you got a person who's a TV personality, it's not just necessarily about what was he like on camera, but to the people behind. Was he always fighting about his contract? Was he an easy employee to deal with, or was he a difficult employee to deal with? That's one of the questions that comes into every firing.
Do you think, like, especially in the world of TV, I have the feeling, and maybe some of this is my own fault from TV shows and movies, I get the feeling that in show business, especially live TV, the perception that everything is okay far outweighs the reality of what is happening behind the camera or within the offices or behind the scenes.
Correct.
So what I agree with what you were saying. You had brought up the point earlier that there's a chance this wouldn't have gone anywhere if they wouldn't have fired him. Like, correct. This was only sent to the employer. This was only sent to his mother. It's not like it was online. It's not like it was streamed. It's not like it was. So, it's weird that would be the moment now that you're worried that relation, like, is he a pain in the ass or his relationship's good at work and stuff like that? Because I feel like that world deals with that every day.
Well, I think it's more of this gives them an out, and or at least they feel like it gives them an out. It could end up in court. And if they are in what they feel is a bad contract, sometimes maybe there's a new boss who didn't hire him, who inherited him, who doesn't like it or doesn't like him or something along those lines. Because they joke about it in sports all the time when you've got because in the sports where they have guaranteed contracts and a player gets a DUI and they're trying to void his contract for a morals clause. Right. When your all-star has 7 DUIs and nobody cares because he's your all-star. So then it's just so that in every aspect of life comes into play. Are the employers looking to get rid of this guy for some reason, and now they feel like they have a reason that they can do it and not get themselves in trouble with violating contract? But if assuming that the guy was just a normal, decent guy and they're just afraid, I think he's going to end up on his feet somewhere.
Oh, he's going to get hired again.
He's going to get hired.
He didn't do anything illegal. As of right now, there is no video. Like, you can't actually go and find it. The other part of this too, as an employer, from what you can tell, from what I gauge from the message, I have a hard time believing he tried to cover it up. I have a hard time believing he didn't tell them it was him. I have a hard time believing that he didn't just come out and say to them, like, yeah, here's what it is. This is what I did. Da, 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 da. Because of that, as an employer, How many people do you think in their offices right now would be willing to admit fault or tell the truth if their job depended on it?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think those people are incredibly hard to find. And in a weird way, you kind of found one of those people. So even if it was a breach of contract, even if you disagree with his actions, doesn't that weigh in? Because there was nothing illegal to what he did, I almost feel like the admission and the accountability almost weighs out what actually happened.
Don't you feel too that we, because the world is so politically correct, and that we kind of thirst for humanness, and that the bosses are acting in a way to like, what you did embarrasses me and embarrasses our company.
Mm-hmm.
And
which by the way, I 10% get. I don't think do you think that's absurd? I'm not saying that should be the thing that matters, but I get that. Doesn't that come along with live TV?
Guess, but it's not.
We have conversations all the time about whether or not we should talk about something on here because we are representing something that we're a part of and something that's bigger than us.
No, I get it. But at the end of the day, don't they just care about what their ratings are a month from now? I think that's the
most important thing. Yeah.
So there's a level of forget about you. You embarrassed me because I'm your boss, whoever the boss is. It's probably a board. You embarrassed the board and you embarrassed the company. So we are letting you go because you embarrassed us. But doesn't America, haven't we got to the point where we rally around the people who are like, he's one of us, we like him, and in this moment of where he's obviously embarrassed, we are going to support him?
Well, some of the irony here is that it is I've tried to avoid making this a political conversation. Some of the irony is that this is New York City. If he were to get fired from a station in deep Texas and they didn't know this about him, but New York City, I don't know. I would have thought.
You're do they even care?
Or is there any chance they didn't already know? That's the other thing that comes into play about this. I can't imagine that they didn't know this.
What did he said he was openly gay.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. But you're right. If it was the Bible Belt, if this happened in Nebraska or Utah, it's
sure.
The reaction would not be as shocking. In New York City, in a major metropolitan area, you're probably who cares?
I just don't. I find myself leaning towards. I just don't think I would have fired him. That's what I find myself leaning towards.
There's a lot of.
It also comes back to as an employer, because this was one of the questions we asked yesterday. As an employer, what should you? Because of the world we live in now, and there's private messages and there's private videos, but the problem is the further we go along, the less private those things are becoming. And so, what now? Should an employer, if an employer just says something, because again, an employer did not stumble upon this. This was not live streamed. This was nothing. This was sent to an employer.
Right.
So as an employer, in a world where this stuff where more and more private things become public because they get sent to other people, what is my responsibility when those things happen? What truly does matter in the sense of whether or not you're an employee in my company or not? Especially when these things are done in or what we think of as the privacy of our own lives. Because that's essentially what happened. This guy, I understand it was a webcam. I understand that there was a chat aspect to it. But there's also this idea he thought he was doing something in the privacy of his home, right, in a stream that was of people that was a mutual beneficiaries. There was no forcing it out into public. There was no forcing it to people that didn't want to see it. And yet it ends up in the employer's lap. And it's a weird world we're in where now you have to figure out how you handle that.
Well, first we get to the moralistic. There's lots of, as you were talking, there were lots of things I thought about. Number one, they get rid of this guy, if a month from now, if the ratings are down, if the backlash is negative, do the people who fired him, are their jobs in trouble?
Maybe.
That's question number one. Because I don't want to say it feels like he's being bullied, but there's no, like in the cancel culture, when someone comes out and says something that is offensive to a certain group and then we get to the aspect of, should they be canceled? Should they be fired? Is that fireable? There's no victim here. He didn't hurt anyone. He didn't try to hurt anyone. No. He didn't say anything. This is a victimless crime, and it's not even a crime. So it just seems like these people are, to protect themselves, they're cutting this guy loose because you embarrassed us. And that's their perception, that they're embarrassed. Does the audience even care? And that's the next question.
Would the audience have ever known?
And the audience wouldn't have. That's why I go back to before. I wonder if off the air because his statement is great, but off the air, was he a pain in the ass? And maybe that's the thing we find. But we get to the other point. So say a boss is driving down anywhere. Well, he's driving down 11 and 15 between Selinsgrove and Harrisburg, where all there are trees, rocks, and adult bookstores.
Right.
And he's driving by and he sees said weatherman walk out of an adult bookstore where he knows that anybody else driving by could have seen this person. Is that fireable?
Which is kind of my point. Because 20 years ago, you would have physically had to almost like, it was either complete circumstance or you physically had to go have that happen. The point I'm making now is that today, those privacies of what you think is your life, all of a sudden now, like, those things can be sent to your employers. And so, yes, to your point, the things, because even what you're describing, that weatherman went out in public. Like, this guy didn't even really go out. Like, he was in his house. It's just,
but that's where it comes to. There's a reason there's 15 adult bookstores between Selinsgrove and Harrisburg.
No, I get it.
So, like,
I'm with you.
Is it a horrible thing to go into one, or is it not? And so those are the other aspects. When you just think of I would love to be in the room with the people who made these decisions. When you look at the world of the Kardashians were I don't want to say launched, but because of a leaked sex tape, where 50 Shades of Grey was the most popular book in the world. And it was more than just a little Harlequin romance. Like, in modern society, when someone told me, did you give me this stat? Did you tell me how much of the internet is made up of porn?
Yeah, it's wild.
It's like a third.
It's over a third.
Mm-hmm. So, like, these people sitting in the board meeting are like, oh, look, does anyone really care? Like, if this is the station that you watch, and I'm not a local news watcher, but like, for the people who watch whatever, NEP or BRE or YOU or Fox or whatever they watch, if you heard this, are you changing the station? Because there's still the normal hosts and the anchors and the reporters and all these things. And does it really matter?
Well, I don't know how to, like, I'm trying to think how to say this, like, correctly. There's also the sense of, like you said, you think it's a board. Like, you think it probably went to a board.
It's probably not just one dude would be my guess.
So what you have to ask yourself is, in a world where we know a third of the internet is porn, and we know every person that's ever been created has come from a sexual act, are we honestly believing that every single person at that board has never sent a nude, has never watched porn, has never participated in porn? Like, are we honestly saying that about that board? Because if not, the board basically is being hypocritical, because the only difference between them and this guy is that someone sent it to their employer.
Okay, here's a thought. Do you think it matters that it was to a guy?
What do you mean by that?
That it was homosexual. Do you think that
I'm confused. Are you asking me if I think it matters that he is a homosexual?
No,
or do you think
the act was a solo act, but that he admits that it was male to male.
I don't think, no, I personally, now again, I'm not there. However, personally, I don't think that's what happened.
So let me ask the follow-up question then. If this is an athlete, a star athlete on your favorite team, and it's male to female, do you think the public is an outcry? Do you think they want the guy traded?
You
do you think they want the
why
guy
did
cut
you
loose?
change? I know, but why did you change the scenario? Because
if it was in the world of testosterone and sports, there are lots of people who would no longer like their favorite athlete if they knew he was gay. Lots of them. They wouldn't like their favorite coach if they knew he was gay.
I know you're going into a different conversation because for me, this wasn't about whether the person was liked.
But what I'm saying is
whether or not the person should be fired.
What I was going to say is, if some superstar athlete did this, do you think the fans care, or do you think all the fans care is, does he score touchdowns, goals, hit home runs, and make 3-pointers? Yeah. And that's all the fans care about. But before I said it, I do realize that there are lots of people that he's my favorite player, and then you find out, oh, he's gay. Now he's no longer my favorite player. There's lots of people in America that would do that.
It's interesting only because we've never had it happen.
Right.
So that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I'm so young that I think I have a different opinion just because of the world that I grew up in compared to maybe.
Your generation is better than the older ones. There's no doubt about it.
I don't know if we're better, but we're certainly better probably at that.
Well, yes. Yeah. Yes. And you're better with technology.
So we'll get there. Yeah, so interesting question. You can look up the story. Erick Adame is his name. So we'll see. I agree with you. I think he's back on his feet. I would imagine he's getting hired again.
I think so too.
I would solidly agree with that. We had someone say he should absolutely not have been fired. He should absolutely be allowed to perform in adult content online. That helps should be a marketing team assisting him in OnlyFans. Have you seen the OnlyFans numbers, by the way? Because we have talked about OnlyFans on here before. So they recently just released the numbers for the number one. Shopping isn't the word, but it was basically where people spend the most money on digitally, essentially. Amazon was number one. OnlyFans was number two.
Stop it.
Yes. That just came out this past week.
Hold on. Now I'm trying to think of what number two would have been. I can't even get what's three.
Just your eDays, your different online shoppings. Okay. Yeah. Retail stores, all that stuff.
Okay.
Etsy was
a big OnlyFans. OnlyFans started out like what's the one? Like a review process, wasn't it?
What do you mean by a review process?
You can rate if you're looking for a plumber, if you're looking for a restaurant. Wasn't that the idea behind it?
I thought the idea,
and then it spiraled.
I thought the idea behind it was that if you were somebody that wasn't if you were someone who wasn't an athlete or an entertainer or whatever, but you had something to offer, OnlyFans was a place for you to go so that you could connect with your fans, give them content, all of that stuff.
I thought it was a review that this is only the people that are buying the products are reviewing it.
Maybe. I don't know. You might have read something or something.
I might be wrong.
Yeah. But the original idea was, and this is where they filled the void without even knowing that they filled the void, without a doubt. And there are, just to clarify, obviously OnlyFans is overwhelmingly that. However, there are people on OnlyFans that are it's weird. There's collectors, there's not musicians, but artists. So there are reasons that people are on OnlyFans.
It's not just for naked people.
Yes, but it's just that percentage keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But yeah, second, only behind Amazon for money spent online.
Wow. And OnlyFans only been around 3 or 4 years, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's again, I don't think people understand. I'm not here to I'm not yay or nay. I'm not good or bad. I'm just stating the facts. I don't think people understand how much porn there is on the internet. It literally makes up over a third of the internet industry is porn. And then you look at what OnlyFans did in a very short amount of time. I just think people are so unaware of how much money, time, and effort actually goes in to the sex industry. I think people are completely oblivious to it in their everyday life.
Do you think if they'd have known back then how big it was going to be, they'd have come up with a better name than porn?
Maybe. Doesn't it stand for pornography?
It's got to be pornography.
I know, but it's got to be Latin or something,
It's just such a...
You don't think it's from you don't think it was derived
it's just
from...
such a clumsy word.
I feel like it was derived from something, don't you think? It had to be.
You know what I learned? Did you watch Bill Maher this week?
Yeah.
Do you know where the word? Well, then you know the answer before I even ask. I shouldn't have asked that, and you could have sounded really smart. Did you know where the word slave comes from?
Oh yeah, it's Latin for or it was Eastern European.
The Slavic.
Yeah, and it had, I forget what they said, but essentially that it was white
because
slaves.
so many Slavic people were slaves that it was just like, oh, you have a Slav.
Yeah.
And then it was
carried over.
That's how it came. Never knew that. Learned something.
Do you want to go for Anna Powell today, or do you want to hold?
No, Anna Powell's too important. Let's hold off.
We'll hold off.
That's a great story too. This is that's one. What'd you say? It's a 5. Is it a 5 episode?
So there's the book, which I can't support enough. If you're interested in that stuff, read the book. The TV series, what they do is really interesting. They do the 5 days, each episode for a day. And then they do 3 episodes of everything, the fallout, the investigation, everything afterwards. So in a weird way, it feels like 2 separate shows.
Okay.
Because you have the 5 days, which
I got to invest 8 episodes.
I don't think you'll do it. I know you. I know you. And no, I'm not even knocking you. I know you, and I just don't think you'll spend the time. And that's more than okay. But the story is fascinating. The conversation around it is really interesting. Anybody if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan, if you're an ER fan, if you're somebody...
I was fans of both.
There you go. Then the show is really good. And then the fact that it's a true story, and then the ethics and the morals behind it, it's a fascinating conversation to have. And I've said with you and other people that I've talked with about it, there's very little gray. You find people who truly believe she is a hero. Like what she went through, and to have the goal to do what she did. This is an absolute hero walking amongst us, still working at LSU. You talk to other people, and she is a murderer, and it is absurd that she got away with what she did. And the idea that, I've literally had someone say to me, she is the most renowned murderer that is still innocent. And so it's a fascinating story, and you typically end up on one. I've never talked about something before where there's such little gray. People either feel like they absolutely know what this person should have done, or they feel like nobody would have known what to do, and what she did was heroic. And it's really interesting. So anybody who's
very Trumpish. He doesn't have a lot of gray.
You don't think so? I think people's opinions of him, there's not a lot of gray, but I think Trump is a very gray subject.
Correct.
Yes.
But if you ask the masses, they either love him or hate him.
Their opinion of him is different. Yes.
By the way, he is in all kinds of court. This just came out in New York State, and I have the New York State has sued him civilly for something. Mm-hmm. It's not criminal. But part of what they're asking is, because they said he lied. They lied about valuations of properties, mm-hmm. which influenced tax bases and bank loans and things like that. So they're asking for $250 million, but they're also saying that Trump, his 3 adult sons, Erick Adame Jr. and Ivanka, and other members of his board can't operate a business in New York and can't borrow money from the state of New York for 5 years. So, and he's 76 and a half years old, not 76 and a half. He turned 76 this summer. Yeah. So, you start running into these. I've never heard, and I'm not a court expert, but I thought civil cases were essentially about money. Mm-hmm. So now it's like money and then another one. There's also another, it's called adult survivor law. I think it's in New York State, where adult survivors of rape or sexual misconduct or something, they're going to be given a year window where they can file for civil damages no matter when the thing took place. Mm-hmm. And there's a lady that claims it's on. I think she announced it yesterday. She was in real estate, and she claims that Trump raped her in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And on whatever the first day that this thing opens, she is filing a suit against him. I just read it right before we started, so I don't know if this came up before, but so to go along with the January 6th stuff that's going on, to go along with the Mar-a-Lago stuff that's going on, there's 2 new ones that are fresh off the presses.
the heat is on. This is it's 2022. We're almost at 2023. After these elections, he would probably announce if he was going to run again. There is not a lot. And again, you and I've expressed on here, but I feel like if there's anybody watching who doesn't know our feelings on Trump, I'm not a huge fan of Trump. However, he's going to get so much heat. I mean, it's very important for half the country that he does not run. And so I'm not excusing anything that you just said. What I'm just saying is like, this is the final push. I mean, this is the heat. This is any liberal legislation, any liberal state, any liberal DA. I mean, anything that can be done to try to keep him occupied or keep him from running again. This, to me, like, this is the push. I mean, to me, that is the beginning of what is about to come out.
You could be right.
Leak about him.
One of the other interesting things that Maher talked about with his panel was he asked, "Is anything going to come from Merrick Garland? Are charges coming?" And Maher, who's clearly a Democrat, said, "Please don't do anything before the midterms. Sure. Like, whatever you do, don't charge him with anything in October because it's going to help the other side."
Sure.
And it's fascinating through all this stuff it's like we talk about the legal. I don't know if anyone thinks anything's ever really going to come of it.
Sure.
I find it hard to believe he's ever going to be convicted of anything.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, we're like, all right, this is what's going on legally. What effect does it have politically?
Sure.
Is still and not just for him, as you talked about in his run in 2024.
Yes.
It's for all the other people in the midterms. And I think we're all in an agreement he's going to run in 2024 if he can.
I would be shocked. But again, it's that, like, it's not so much that, like, the things that I think a lot of what's happening around him, there's certainly an idea that you could make the argument that it is partly self-induced, without a doubt.
Right.
I said to you with the Mar-a-Lago stuff, like, he just doesn't like to cooperate. Like, he just doesn't, like, regardless of how important you think the documents were, regardless of whether or not you think he committed a crime, the one truth that I will gladly admit as a registered Republican, like, the dude won't cooperate with anybody, right, for any reason. So I totally get it. I think a lot of what's falling down onto him is self-induced. I'm also very aware that a lot of what is about to take place is like, it really, really matters what happens the next 6 months and whether or not he is allowed to announce his campaign. And I think for a lot of, it's kind of like, it's when you're guarding, I'll use one of your great sports analogies. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It's like when someone has the hot hand, and sometimes the simplest solution is just don't let them catch the ball. And the next 6 months is going to be, do not let Trump touch the ball. How do we make sure that he doesn't announce, that he can't announce, that he can't even get the campaign started off of the ground? And that is what you are seeing. So I'm not saying what you just read isn't there. Like, I have no doubt that what you are reading could very possibly be true. I have no doubt in the past that he has done things he shouldn't have done, especially with women. But that is what a lot of this is it's not letting Trump catch the ball. Do not let him get his campaign.
I think that was a very good analogy. And whenever we talk about this, I keep going. One of the things I keep going back to is if COVID doesn't show up, Trump won again.
Know what's funny?
He would have won if COVID didn't arrive.
Because I think we've only really talked about that once or twice, like on the show briefly over the last 2 years. The further we get removed from that election and from COVID, the more I believe it's true.
The economy was clicking,
just like, yeah. And it's not,
and he was divisive.
Yes,
like he was hated and loved.
Yeah,
but
and I can express here,
the economy was flowing.
This isn't about what you or I wanted. This is just you or I looking back at what was transpiring that February before COVID hit and everything fell apart. I told you before, I truly believe one of the things that bothered me most, and I really believe one of his greatest flaws as a president, was his inability to give proper information when the pandemic started. I truly believe
that it hurt when he said we'll be back in church by Easter and stuff.
And here's the other thing too. If you are, and again, it's really hard to do this in politics. If you are able to separate that subject for a second, right? So this is me fully admitting it was one of the things that bothered me the most. The messaging was horrible, really, really bad. However, if you're able to look at what happened after that or around it, it's part of the reason we were successful more so than other countries and other continents, because we warp speed, put it all into the vaccine, started pushing forward, and other countries didn't put as much money into it. They weren't able to get the resources. So it's this weird counterbalance of like, I completely disagree with the things he was saying, but then when you look at the end result, like 8 months, 12 months later, it did work out. He just wasn't willing to let people know, like, hey, this is happening. Like, hey, we don't know. Or like, hey, this is a problem. It's going to take 8 to 12 months. But see, I think he's such a businessman. That's not what you do, right?
Well,
like
I think
you sell the goods before you even know you have them. And that's essentially what he was doing.
Yes. And I think that even in politics, there's not, because one of the things that got him there was he wasn't a politician. Right. I think clearly that's one of the things America embraced, especially his base. But then you get into politics. In looking back, it would have been so much better if he would have just gone up, or anyone would have gone up and said, we don't really know.
Yeah.
This is unprecedented. We're doing the best we can, and we're trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, no,
I'm
with you.
But politicians don't do that. They go up and they stand and they say, stand absolutely. At the debates and the State of the Union, and they always give everything has to be emphatic. Sure. And like, you need to show strength. And it started with the whole, you'll be back in church by Easter. And it just spiraled.
All of that. Yes. And some of the stuff because maybe this is something I can just mention now, because we have about 5 more minutes. It's not just like a Democrat, Republican political issue. I had said to you before, I really think scientists struggled knowing, like, part of science is trial and error. And when you don't have the time to do the trial and error, but people want answers, right, you're going to say things that are wrong. You right. just are. Some of that stuff's coming out now. I told you about the whole thing with Harvard and China, and how essentially it's now factually Evergreen, which is part of the real estate in China. It's like one of the biggest. It almost brought down the world economy.
Right, you told me
a couple of months ago. They donated over $100 million. I believe it was $115 million to Harvard. After Harvard had basically exposed the lab leak, there was this concept of there was a Harvard professor who was working with China and was flying over to Wuhan. This is all factual. Like, it's all right there in the government documents. It's now coming out about Harvard has admitted to the $115 million donation from Evergrande. I just laugh because it's weird how politicians on both sides were so nervous about getting the facts right, but really it was deeper than that. It was science. Like, I think doctors got nervous. I think scientists got nervous. Institutions got nervous. People are accepting money. People didn't want to pick a side. I think for scientists and doctors, it was really nerve-wracking to be wrong. And so they wanted to tell these people, like, here's how you be safe. This works. This doesn't. But in reality, again, like, science is trial and error. And a lot of this stuff we had never been through. Like, we hadn't actually done. We had not done a true pandemic since 1917.
The Spanish flu.
1917. It had been a century since. Yeah. So the point I'm making is everybody that was dealing with this, sure, there's history books and there's texts and there's stuff like that, but no one had been in the thick of it before. No one.
No. And you're right. People want timelines.
Yes.
Even on your phone when we're going. Like, when you break, it's one of the things I tell kids, in sports and stuff. It's easy when you break your wrist and you go to the doctor and he puts a cast in and he says 4 to 6 weeks.
Sure.
And you can now be like, okay, 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you say, hey, we're going to do this, whether it's, developing a skill or weight loss or something, that the end is just out there somewhere.
Yeah. And you don't know where.
And you don't, where if we're like, hey, you do this every day, or 4 days a week for 4 weeks, and you are going to be here.
Sure.
But you don't know.
And that's what'll be interesting moving forward, because obviously there's all these Fauci stuff and there's the memes and there's all that.
Right.
I think one of the things that's going to be fascinating to watch when we look back, because I think people have already done the books and the memoirs and stuff like that, but really, like 25 years from now, when you look back at it and the dust kind of settles, I think one of the things that you're going to realize is people like Fauci and stuff like that were in an impossible position. And you could see early on, Fauci would kind of be like, well, we don't know that for a fact. And we don't just do the best you can, stay away from. And as time went on, Fauci became more and more willing to commit to things. And I don't think it's because Fauci wanted to.
They told him to.
I think not only was Fauci told to, but I also think it was that idea of like the stress of like, we need an answer. We need an answer. And
Right.
so I actually think as we go back, I think what's going to happen is people like Fauci and that are going to end up, I don't want to say they're going to take the fall, but what's going to end up happening is like doctors and scientists that wanted to come out and say, like, we know this for a fact, they're almost going to end up taking more of the fall than politicians in a weird way, despite the fact that the stress was actually coming from the politicians themselves.
I get it. It's like when a player or a parent comes to you at the beginning, it's like, is this how the whole season's going to go?
Yeah.
And you're like, I have no idea.
Right.
We just started.
Right.
Like, let's let things play out a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I'm with
So
you.
you're interested.
All right. So tomorrow we're doing 5 days of Memorial.
Is that what you want to do tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that then. Thank you guys for watching the Midday Show. Be sure to go to NorthcentralPa.com for all of your local.
So we should tell everyone, do your homework, watch all 8 episodes, or read the book. Either one.
all 8 episodes.
By tomorrow at noon, and we'll be ready.
You can watch all 8 episodes in 7.5 hours.
And I'm not doing either of them, but you have done both.
And it
so
might be
we're covered.
If you skip the intros and the outros and stuff, you could probably do it in 7 hours.
Yeah.
Just
People have their assignment.
No breaks, bedpan, just get it done.
We should do that. We should do like a book club, except a thing.
Yeah.
And we should announce this, and then you have like a week to be prepared.
The problem though is you don't like that stuff.
It would be harder for me than you. There's no doubt about it.
Yes.
You
don't like to read, and you don't like episodic.
I like
TV.
to read just short things.
That's not how this works.
I like to read short.
It's not. I mean, we could have clickbait club. Do you want to have a clickbait club?
I am all in. You know what I was reading at 5:30 this morning when I couldn't sleep?
What's that?
The roles that either made or broke actors' careers. It was interesting.
Okay.
It was interesting. You see some of these famous people who disappeared, and like a role that they were tied to, and they say that this is what, which is a little hokey because these people come and go. Brendan Fraser is one that is in the news now.
He got really hosed. Have you ever like deep dived into that? When you're bored tonight, do it. It's worth it. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who really got the short end of the stick. He is one of them.
One of the ones they listed, Alicia Silverstone, was in one of the Batmans, I guess. And they said that ruined her. Cuba Gooding Jr. on Boat Trip is one that I remember. Michael Myers not Michael Myers. He's the bad guy in Halloween. Mike Myers in the Love Guru. Yeah, I guess they're rattling. And I've never seen any of these, but I was like, oh, I've heard of that one. Oh, I've heard of that one.
Didn't Starship Troopers end a lot of careers? I think it was Starship Troopers ended a lot of careers, and then one of the more recent ones was a Disney one. The guy who played Tim Riggins in Friday Night Lights, he was going to be like, he was on the up and up, and then he did this movie for Disney. John Carter was the name of the movie.
I remember the movie.
And it flopped horribly. And it really altered like his career.
But that it also had ones that were on the up, like was De Niro, was he in Raging Bull first, or was he in Godfather 2 first? But it had both sides of it. Yeah. I just remember the flops more because they were more entertaining.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right,
good.
So there you go. But yes, if we want to do a clickbait, I'm it. I am your leader.
The clickbait club would be hilarious. I'm Jeff Beverly. He's Mark Lucina. We will see you guys tomorrow.
And informative.